The morning mist clung to the ancient towers of Castle Valdoria like a shroud of sorrow. King Edmund stood at his study window, watching the sun struggle to break through the grey clouds that had seemed permanent over his kingdom for the past 3 months. His withered hands gripped the stone windowsill as he tried to process the devastating news that Dr. Helena Marsh had delivered just moments before. "Your Majesty," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Prince Alexander's condition has progressed faster than we anticipated." King Edmund closed his eyes, remembering the day 8-year-old Prince Alexander had first complained of the strange headaches. They had dismissed it as childhood stress from royal duties and tutoring. Then came the dizzy spells during formal ceremonies, the moments when the bright, curious boy would suddenly seem lost and confused. The royal physicians had run countless tests, consulted with specialists from neighboring kingdoms, and even sought the wisdom of the ancient healers from the mountain villages. The diagnosis had come like a thunderclap on a clear day, a rare neurological condition that was slowly stealing away the prince's cognitive abilities. It was progressive, irreversible, and heartbreaking in its cruel precision. The boy who had once recited entire passages from history books was now struggling to remember the names of his favorite horses in the royal stables. Crown Prince William entered the study without his usual confident stride. At 32, he had always been the picture of royal composure, but today his shoulders sagged under an invisible weight. His blue eyes, so much like his father's, were rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that sleep could never cure. "Father," William said softly, closing the heavy oak door behind him. "Dr. Marsh told me about the latest tests." Edmund turned from the window to face his eldest son. The king had aged visibly in recent months, his once dark hair now completely silver, and new lines etched deeply around his eyes. "Sit down, my son. We need to talk." William took the leather chair across from his father's desk, the same chair where he had sat as a child while learning about the responsibilities of future kingship. Now those lessons seemed like distant memories compared to the harsh reality they faced. "The doctors in the capital confirmed what Dr. Marsh suspected," Edmund began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Alexander's condition is entering what they call the accelerated phase. His memory, his ability to recognize us, to function independently, all of it will deteriorate more rapidly now." William's composure finally cracked. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "He asked me yesterday who I was," he whispered. "My own son looked at me like I was a stranger, and I didn't know what to say." The crown prince had always been especially close to his youngest child. While his daughter Princess Isabella was strong-willed and independent at 10, and middle son Prince Gabriel was serious and studious at 12, little Alexander had been William's shadow. The boy had inherited his father's love of horses and adventure, often sneaking away from his tutors to join William on informal rides through the countryside. "I remember when he was born," William continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You told me that being a father would teach me more about leadership than any textbook ever could. You were right." Watching him grow, seeing his curiosity about everything, his kindness to the castle staff, his genuine excitement about someday serving our people. He was going to be an extraordinary king. Edmund moved to place a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "He still is extraordinary, William. This disease doesn't change who Alexander is in his heart. It doesn't erase the love he has given us or the joy he has brought to everyone who knows him. But what kind of future can we give him now?" William looked up at his father with desperate eyes. "How do we tell Isabella and Gabriel? How do we tell the kingdom that their beloved young prince is disappearing a little more each day?" The king returned to his chair, suddenly, feeling every one of his 68 years. "We face it with the same courage and dignity that our family has shown for 7 centuries. We love him, we support him, and we make sure he knows that he is valued not for what he might become, but for who he is right now." Through the study windows, they could hear the distant sound of children's laughter from the castle gardens. Alexander was playing with Isabella and Gabriel, though his games were becoming simpler, more childlike than before. The royal physicians had recommended maintaining as normal a routine as possible, allowing Alexander to engage in activities that brought him joy while they still could. "Princess Catherine is struggling terribly," William admitted, referring to his wife. "She spends hours reading to him, hoping something will spark his memory. Yesterday she showed him pictures from his birthday party last month, and he couldn't remember any of it. She came to our chambers afterward and cried until she fell asleep from exhaustion. Edmund nodded gravely. Catherine had been a devoted mother from the moment she married into the royal family. She had embraced her role not just as a princess, but as a mother who wanted to give her children as normal a childhood as possible within the constraints of royal life. Watching her youngest son slip away was devastating her gentle spirit. "We need to consider telling the children soon," the king said quietly. "Isabella has been asking questions about why Alexander seems different lately. She's noticed that he's stopped joining their study sessions and that his tutor has been dismissed. Gabriel is old enough to sense that something serious is happening." William stood and began pacing the length of the study, a habit he had developed whenever facing difficult decisions. "I keep thinking there must be something we haven't tried, some specialist we haven't consulted. What about the healers in the Eastern Kingdoms? Or the research facilities in the Republic of Astoria?" "Dr. Marsh has been in contact with every expert on the continent," Edmund replied gently. "This particular condition is so rare that there have been fewer than 50 documented cases in the past century. The most we can hope for is to slow its progression slightly, but even that is uncertain." The king pulled open a drawer in his desk and withdrew a small wooden box. Inside was a simple silver ring, unadorned except for the royal seal of Valdoria. "This was your great-grandfather's ring. He wore it not during ceremonies or state functions, but during the most difficult period of his reign, when the kingdom faced a terrible famine. He said it reminded him that leadership isn't about the crown you wear in public, but about the strength you find when everything seems hopeless." William took the ring, feeling its weight in his palm. "What would he have done in our situation?" "He would have done exactly what you're doing now," Edmund said with quiet pride. "He would have put his family first, sought every possible solution, and, when those solutions weren't enough, he would have found a way to turn his pain into something meaningful for his people." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Princess Catherine entered, her usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the stress she had been under. Her golden hair was loosely braided, and she wore a simple day dress instead of her formal attire. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice hoarse from recent tears. "But Alexander is asking for both of you. He's having one of his clearer moments." William and Edmund exchanged a look of both hope and heartbreak. The clear moments were becoming rarer, brief windows when Alexander seemed almost like his old self before the fog of confusion returned. They found the young prince in the castle's library, sitting in his favorite chair by the large fireplace. He was holding a book about knights and dragons, one of the many stories that had captivated his imagination before his illness. For a moment, seeing him there with his dark hair catching the firelight and his legs swinging from the oversized chair, it was easy to pretend that nothing had changed. "Papa! Grandfather!" Alexander called out with genuine delight when he saw them enter. "I was just reading about Sir Gareth the Bold. Did you know he once fought a dragon with 3 heads? William sat on the arm of Alexander's chair while Edmund took the seat beside them. "I did know that story," William said, his voice carefully controlled. "You've always loved tales of brave knights." "I want to be brave like Sir Gareth," Alexander said seriously. "When I grow up and become king, I want to protect everyone in the kingdom, just like the knights in these stories." Edmund felt his heart break a little more. The innocent confidence in his grandson's voice, the way he still spoke about his future as if it were certain and bright, was almost too much to bear. Yet there was something beautiful in the child's unwavering optimism, even in the face of an enemy he couldn't understand or fight. "You're already brave, my boy," Edmund said softly. "Braver than any knight in those stories." Alexander beamed at the compliment, then turned to his father with suddenly serious eyes. "Papa, why does everyone look sad lately? Did I do something wrong?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. William struggled to find words that would be truthful without being frightening, age-appropriate without being dismissive. "You haven't done anything wrong, Alexander," William said finally, gathering his son into his arms. "Sometimes grown-ups are sad about things that have nothing to do with you. But what's important is that we love you very much, and that will never, ever change." Alexander seemed satisfied with this explanation and returned to his book, pointing out illustrations and asking questions about the various creatures depicted in the stories. For the next hour, the three generations of Valdorian royalty sat together in the warm library, creating what they all knew might be one of their last completely normal family moments. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Alexander's energy waned, and the confusion returned to his eyes. He looked around the library as if seeing it for the first time, then, at his father and grandfather with that heartbreaking expression of polite bewilderment that had become all too familiar. "Excuse me," he said with the careful politeness that had been drilled into him since birth. "I think I might be lost. Could you help me find my way back to my room?" William felt his composure finally shatter completely. He scooped his son into his arms, holding him close as tears streamed down his face. "Of course, little one. Let's get you back to your room." As they walked through the castle corridors, Alexander chattered innocently about the paintings on the walls and the suits of armor that lined the hallways, treating each familiar sight as a wonderful new discovery. The cruel irony wasn't lost on any of them. The castle that had been Alexander's home his entire life was becoming a foreign place to him, even as it remained the center of his world. That evening, after Alexander had been settled for the night with his favorite stuffed dragon and a gentle lullaby from Catherine, the royal couple sat in their private sitting room, finally, allowing themselves to fully process the day's events. "The doctors want to start him on a new medication," Catherine said quietly, staring into the fireplace. "It might slow the progression slightly, but it could also make him drowsy and less like himself during his good moments." William reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had comforted them both through years of royal pressures and personal challenges. "What do you think we should do?" "I think we should let him be himself for as long as possible," Catherine replied after a long pause. "If we only have limited time with the Alexander we know, I want that time to be filled with joy, not medical interventions that might steal away his personality even faster." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the fireplace and listening to the distant sounds of the castle settling for the night. Somewhere in the corridors above, their son was sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the battles being fought on his behalf and the hearts breaking in his honor. "I keep thinking about all the things I wanted to teach him," William said eventually. "How to be a just ruler, how to balance duty with compassion, how to carry the weight of the crown without losing sight of his humanity. I had so many plans for his education, his training, his gradual introduction to royal responsibilities." "Maybe," Catherine suggested gently, "the lesson he's teaching us is more important than any lesson we could have taught him. He's showing us what unconditional love looks like, what it means to face each day with joy despite circumstances we can't control." William considered his wife's words, finding unexpected comfort in them. Alexander's illness was stripping away everything they had assumed about his future, but it was also revealing the pure essence of who he was, a loving, trusting, joyful child who approached each day with wonder, regardless of what that day might bring. As they prepared for bed, both William and Catherine knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new heartbreaks, and new difficult decisions. But they also knew that they would face those challenges together, as a family united in their love for their son and their determination to give him the best possible life, however long or short it might be. In the quiet of their royal chambers, surrounded by the weight of tradition and responsibility that had defined their lives, they held each other close and whispered prayers for strength, for wisdom, and for the precious gift of time with the little boy who had taught them that some of life's most important lessons come wrapped in the smallest, most vulnerable packages. The weeks that followed Dr. Marsh's devastating update brought an unusual quiet to Castle Valdoria. The normal bustle of royal activities continued, but there was an underlying tension that even the youngest servants could sense. Princess Isabella had begun asking more pointed questions about her little brother's behavior, while 12-year-old Prince Gabriel had retreated into his studies with an intensity that worried his parents. Crown Prince William found himself caught between his royal duties and his desperate desire to spend every possible moment with Alexander. State meetings that once commanded his full attention now felt like obstacles keeping him from his son. He had started bringing Alexander to his private office during the child's clearer moments, letting him color at a small table while William handled correspondence and administrative duties. "Papa, what's that?" Alexander asked one morning, pointing to the official state seal that William was pressing into warm wax on important documents. It's our family seal, William explained, grateful for one of Alexander's increasingly rare moments of curiosity and clarity. Someday, you'll use one just like it to make important decisions for our kingdom. Alexander nodded solemnly, then returned to his coloring book, carefully staying within the lines as he filled in a picture of a castle that looked remarkably similar to their own home. William watched his son's concentrated expression and felt a familiar stab of grief for all the official ceremonies and state functions that Alexander would never understand or participate in. The decision to tell Isabella and Gabriel had been weighing heavily on both William and Catherine. They had consulted with the castle's chaplain, Dr. Marsh, and even a specialist in childhood psychology who had made the journey from the capital. Everyone agreed that the children deserved to know the truth, but finding the right words seemed impossible. It was Isabella who finally forced the conversation. She appeared in her parents' private dining room during breakfast one morning, still in her nightgown, with tears streaming down her face. "I heard the servants talking," she announced with the straightforward honesty that had always characterized her personality. "They said Alexander is sick and that he's going to die. Is that true?" Catherine nearly dropped her teacup, while William felt his stomach plummet. They had tried so hard to keep the household staff informed without alarming them, but clearly their efforts at discretion had failed. "Come here, sweetheart," Catherine said, opening her arms to her daughter. "Sit with us and let's talk about this properly." Isabella climbed into her mother's lap, something she hadn't done in months as she had been asserting her independence. But fear had a way of making children seek comfort in familiar places. "Alexander is very sick," William began carefully, "but it's not the kind of sickness that means he's going to die soon. It's a sickness that affects how his brain works, which is why he sometimes seems confused or doesn't remember things." "Is that why he didn't know who I was yesterday?" Isabella asked, her voice small and frightened. The previous day had been particularly difficult. Alexander had wandered into Isabella's room while she was practicing piano and had stood in the doorway looking bewildered. When she had greeted him cheerfully, he had backed away and called for a servant to help him find the princess with the yellow hair because he wanted to hear her play music. Isabella had been devastated to realize that her own brother no longer recognized her. "Yes, that's exactly why," Catherine said gently, stroking her daughter's long blonde hair. "The sickness makes it hard for Alexander to remember people and places, even people he loves very much." "Can the doctors fix it?" Isabella asked with the hopeful innocence of childhood. William and Catherine exchanged a look over their daughter's head. "The doctors are doing everything they can to help Alexander feel comfortable and happy," William said. "But this particular sickness can't be cured. It will probably get worse over time." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness that had always made her seem older than her 10 years. "Does Gabriel know?" "We haven't told him yet," Catherine admitted. "We wanted to talk to you first." "He already knows something is wrong," Isabella said matter-of-factly. "He's been reading medical books in the library. I saw him looking up brain diseases." This news didn't surprise William. Gabriel had always been the most intellectually curious of their children, approaching problems with a scholarly determination that reminded William of his own father. It made sense that Gabriel would try to research and understand what was happening to his younger brother. "Would you like to help us talk to Gabriel?" Catherine asked. "Sometimes it's easier to hear difficult news when the whole family is together." Isabella nodded gravely, then asked the question that William had been dreading: "What happens to Alexander when he gets worse? Will he stop being our brother?" The question hit William like a physical blow. In all his preparation for difficult conversations about illness and prognosis, he hadn't anticipated having to address his daughter's fear that Alexander's essential identity might disappear along with his memory. "Alexander will always be your brother," William said firmly, taking Isabella's small hands in his larger ones. "Even if he doesn't remember your name or recognize your face, he's still the same person inside. He still loves music and stories and horses. He still laughs at silly jokes and loves to be hugged. The sickness might take away his memories, but it can't take away who he is or how much we love him." Isabella seemed comforted by this explanation, though William could see that she was still struggling to fully understand the implications of Alexander's condition. "Can I still play with him?" "Of course," Catherine said quickly. "In fact, it's very important that you keep playing with him and talking to him. Even if he doesn't always remember your games together, he still enjoys them in the moment." They found Gabriel in the library, exactly where Isabella had predicted. He was surrounded by medical textbooks, some of them clearly too advanced for his 12-year-old reading level, but he was working through them with determined concentration. "Gabriel?" William said softly, not wanting to startle his son. "Could you join us for a moment?" Gabriel looked up with eyes that were far too serious for his age. "Is this about Alexander's neurological condition?" he asked, using terminology that he had obviously learned from his research. William felt a mixture of pride and sadness at his son's directness. Gabriel had inherited the scholarly nature of his grandfather along with a mature sense of responsibility that sometimes worried his parents. "Yes, it is," William said, settling into a chair beside his son while Catherine and Isabella sat on the nearby couch. "What have you learned from your reading?" "I know that progressive neurological disorders in children are rare but often devastating," Gabriel said with clinical precision that was heartbreaking coming from someone so young. "I know that most of them don't have effective treatments and that they typically result in significant cognitive decline." Isabella gasped softly at her brother's blunt assessment, but Gabriel continued with the same matter-of-fact tone. "I also know that Alexander has been exhibiting symptoms for several months and that his condition appears to be advancing rapidly based on his recent behavioral changes." Catherine reached over to take Gabriel's hand. "You're right about all of that," she said gently. "But what your books can't tell you is how we, as a family, are going to face this together." Gabriel's composure finally cracked slightly. "I don't understand why this happened to him. Alexander never hurt anyone. He's kind and funny and he was going to be a good king someday. It's not fair." "You're absolutely right," William said, his own voice thick with emotion. "It's not fair at all. Sometimes terrible things happen to wonderful people, and there's no good explanation for it." "Is he going to die?" Gabriel asked, echoing his sister's earlier fear but with a more clinical directness. "The doctors don't think this condition will shorten his life significantly," William explained. "But it will change how he experiences life. He may eventually need constant care, and he might not be able to recognize any of us or take care of himself." Gabriel nodded slowly, processing this information with the same methodical approach he brought to his academic studies. "What can I do to help him?" The question surprised William. Where Isabella had worried about whether Alexander would still be her brother, and Catherine struggled with grief over lost futures, Gabriel was immediately focused on practical solutions. "Keep being his big brother," William said. "Read to him, play simple games with him, be patient when he's confused. Some days he'll seem almost normal, and other days he might not know who you are. Both of those things are okay." Over the following days, the family dynamics began to shift as everyone adapted to their new reality. Isabella threw herself into entertaining Alexander, organizing elaborate puppet shows and simple games that could hold his attention during his increasingly brief periods of clarity. She had an intuitive understanding of how to interact with him on his level, never talking down to him but also never expecting more than he could give. Gabriel approached his brother's condition like a research project, reading everything he could find about ways to stimulate cognitive function and improve quality of life for patients with neurological disorders. He created structured activities designed to exercise Alexander's remaining mental abilities and carefully tracked his brother's good days and bad days in a notebook. Catherine found herself torn between hope and despair. During Alexander's clear moments, she would feel a surge of optimism, convincing herself that perhaps the doctors were wrong or that his condition was stabilizing. But then would come the confusion, the blank stares, the heartbreaking questions about who she was and why she was in his room. The castle staff rallied around the young prince with touching devotion. The stable master, Thomas, who had taught Alexander to ride his first pony, now spent extra time with the boy, patiently reintroducing him to the same horses day after day. The kitchen staff prepared his favorite meals and never showed impatience when he forgot basic table manners or asked the same questions repeatedly. One particularly difficult evening, Alexander became agitated and fearful, not recognizing his own bedroom and insisting that he needed to go home. William spent hours walking with him through the castle corridors, pointing out familiar paintings and tapestries, hoping something might trigger a memory. Finally, they ended up in the music room, where Catherine was playing a gentle melody on the piano. Something about the music seemed to calm Alexander immediately. He stopped his restless pacing and moved toward the piano with curiosity rather than fear. Catherine, noticing his interest, began to play some of the simple songs she had sung to him as a baby. "I know that song," Alexander said suddenly, his face lighting up with recognition. "My mama used to sing it to me." Catherine's hands faltered on the keys as tears blurred her vision. "I am your mama, sweetheart," she whispered. Alexander studied her face carefully, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You have kind eyes," he said finally. "Like my mama does." It wasn't recognition, exactly, but it was connection. And, in that moment, Catherine understood what William had been trying to tell her, that love didn't require memory, that the bond between them existed beyond Alexander's ability to recall or name it. The music became a regular part of their evenings. Even when Alexander couldn't remember who they were, he responded to familiar melodies with joy and calm. Gabriel researched the therapeutic effects of music on neurological patients and created playlists of Alexander's favorite songs. Isabella learned to play simple tunes on various instruments, delighting in her brother's enthusiastic applause even when he couldn't remember her name. As winter approached, the entire kingdom began to sense that something significant was happening within the royal family. Official functions had been scaled back, and Prince William's usual public appearances had become less frequent. The Royal Communications Office issued carefully worded statements about the family requiring privacy for personal matters, but speculation ran rampant among the nobility and common citizens alike. King Edmund made the difficult decision to begin preparing the kingdom for the truth. He met with his closest advisors, the heads of parliament, and religious leaders throughout Valdoria, explaining Alexander's condition and discussing how the royal family would continue to serve their people while dealing with this personal crisis. "The strength of a monarchy," he told his council, "is not in its perfection, but in its humanity. Our people will understand that even royal families face impossible challenges. What matters is how we respond to those challenges." The response from the kingdom's leadership was overwhelmingly supportive. Messages of love and offers of assistance poured in from noble families, religious communities, and even ordinary citizens who had heard whispered rumors about the young prince's illness. One letter that particularly moved the royal family came from a farming community in the northern provinces. A young girl named Emma, who was the same age as Alexander, had written to say that her family was praying for the prince and that she hoped he knew how much the people of Valdoria loved him, even if he couldn't remember their names. "People don't love their princes because of what they remember," Emma had written in her careful child's handwriting. "They love them because of who they are in their hearts." The letter was passed around the royal family several times, each member finding different comfort in its simple wisdom. Isabella declared that she wanted to write back to Emma personally, while Gabriel began researching ways that the royal family could better support other families dealing with similar medical challenges. As the first snows began to fall over Castle Valdoria, the family gathered one evening for what had become their new tradition, a quiet dinner together, followed by music in the sitting room. Alexander sat between his siblings, sometimes recognizing them and sometimes treating them as friendly strangers, but always responding to their love with his own gentle affection. King Edmund watched his grandchildren and felt a complex mixture of grief and pride. Alexander's illness was stealing away the future they had all imagined, but it was also revealing truths about love, family, and resilience that might have remained hidden under easier circumstances. The little prince who had once been destined to wear the crown might never remember his royal heritage, but he was teaching his family and his kingdom lessons about grace under pressure that no textbook could provide. In losing his memory, Alexander was helping everyone around him discover what truly mattered, not the roles they played or the titles they carried, but the love they shared and the kindness they showed to one another in their darkest moments. The announcement came on a gray February morning, delivered with the same formal dignity that had characterized royal communications for centuries. King Edmund, standing before the gathered press and representatives from across Valdoria, spoke with a steady voice that betrayed none of the private anguish his family had endured for months. "It is with heavy hearts that the royal family shares news regarding our beloved Prince Alexander," the king began, his words carefully chosen to convey both transparency and hope. "Our young prince has been diagnosed with a rare neurological condition that affects his cognitive abilities. While this presents significant challenges, Prince Alexander remains a cherished member of our family and continues to bring joy to all who know him." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, flowers, cards, and small gifts began arriving at the castle gates. Children from across the kingdom sent hand-drawn pictures of dragons and knights, remembering Alexander's well-known love of adventure stories. Adult citizens wrote heartfelt letters sharing their own experiences with family illness and offering support to the royal family. Princess Catherine stood at her sitting room window, watching the steady stream of visitors leaving tokens of affection at the castle entrance. She held a letter from a mother in the eastern provinces whose own son had faced a devastating illness. "Your Highness," the woman had written, "please know that love doesn't measure itself in memories. Every moment of joy you give Prince Alexander is a gift that exists beyond his ability to recall it." The public response surprised even King Edmund, who had feared that the announcement might shake the kingdom's confidence in the royal family's stability. Instead, the outpouring of support seemed to bring the nation together in a way that few events ever had. "Perhaps," suggested the castle chaplain during one of their regular conversations, "people are responding so strongly because Alexander's situation reminds them of their own vulnerability. Every family fears losing someone they love. The royal family's willingness to be honest about their pain gives others permission to acknowledge their own." Meanwhile, within the castle walls, life had settled into new routines designed around Alexander's changing needs. His formal education had been replaced with simple activities that brought him pleasure: finger painting, listening to stories, playing with soft toys that couldn't hurt him during his increasingly frequent moments of agitation. Isabella had become particularly skilled at reading her brother's moods. She could sense when he was becoming overwhelmed and would quietly begin singing one of his favorite songs or suggest a walk in the garden. Her natural empathy, always a strong part of her personality, had developed into an almost intuitive understanding of how to comfort Alexander. "She's going to be an extraordinary queen someday," Catherine observed to William one afternoon as they watched Isabella patiently help Alexander build a tower with colorful blocks. "This experience is teaching her about leadership in ways that no formal training ever could." Gabriel had channeled his grief into action, working with the castle staff to create a more supportive environment for his brother. He had researched sensory-friendly lighting, organized Alexander's room to minimize confusion, and even designed simple visual schedules to help his brother navigate daily activities. His notebooks were filled with observations about what seemed to help Alexander and what caused distress. "I want to study medicine," Gabriel announced to his parents one evening. "When I grow up, I want to help find cures for diseases like Alexander's." William felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. Gabriel's determination was admirable, but William worried that his 12-year-old son was placing too much responsibility on his own shoulders. "That's a wonderful goal," William said carefully, "but remember that helping Alexander right now is just as important as any future medical breakthroughs. The love and patience you show him every day makes a real difference in his quality of life." Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. "I know that taking care of him matters now. But I also want there to be hope for other families who go through this." The family's new reality became more public than they had anticipated when Isabella made an unexpected announcement during a routine charitable visit to a local children's hospital. She had been reading to young patients, a duty she had always enjoyed, when one child asked her why Prince Alexander never came to visit anymore. "My brother Alexander has a sickness that makes his brain work differently," Isabella explained with the straightforward honesty that had become her hallmark. "He has trouble remembering things and sometimes gets confused. But he's still my brother, and we still love him just as much." The conversation was overheard by several adults, including journalists who had been covering the royal visit. By evening, Isabella's candid explanation was being repeated across the kingdom, earning praise for her maturity and openness. "Perhaps," suggested Catherine that night, "we should allow the children to be more involved in public discussions about Alexander's condition. They understand it in ways that might help other families." This led to a carefully planned television interview featuring the entire royal family. It was unlike any royal broadcast in Valdoria's history, informal, emotional, and refreshingly honest about the challenges they faced. Alexander himself appeared briefly in the segment, playing contentedly with his toys while his family spoke around him. He seemed unbothered by the cameras and occasionally looked up to smile at familiar voices, though it was clear he didn't understand the significance of the moment. "We want people to know that having a family member with special needs isn't something to hide or be ashamed of," William said during the interview. "Alexander brings light to our lives every single day. His laughter, his curiosity about simple things, his ability to find joy in the present moment, these are gifts that we're grateful for." The interview generated discussions across Valdoria and neighboring kingdoms about disability, royal duties, and the meaning of service. Medical professionals noted the family's emphasis on quality of life over cure-seeking, while child psychologists praised the way Isabella and Gabriel had been included in age-appropriate discussions about their brother's condition. But perhaps the most significant impact was on other families dealing with similar challenges. The royal family began receiving letters from parents who had felt isolated and hopeless, thanking them for showing that love and dignity could coexist with profound disability. One letter that particularly moved Catherine came from a woman whose elderly mother had dementia. "Your Highness," she wrote, "watching how you treat Prince Alexander with such tenderness and respect has changed how I interact with my own mother. I stopped seeing her confusion as a loss and started seeing our good moments as precious gifts." As spring arrived at Castle Valdoria, Alexander's condition had progressed to the point where he rarely had extended periods of clarity. Most days, he lived in a world of his own making, where his family were kind strangers who appeared and disappeared from his awareness. But his fundamental personality, gentle, curious, and affectionate, remained intact. The castle had adapted completely to accommodate his needs. Soft music played constantly in the background. Sharp corners had been padded. The staff had learned to approach him slowly and speak in calm, reassuring tones. Most importantly, everyone understood that their goal wasn't to force Alexander to remember or to push him beyond his current abilities, but simply to ensure that each day contained moments of peace and joy. William found that his relationship with his youngest son had evolved in unexpected ways. Where once they had shared adventures and conversations about the future, now their connection existed in simpler moments. Alexander's delight when William would push him gently on the garden swing, his calm acceptance of his father's presence during difficult evenings, the way he would reach for William's hand when feeling uncertain. "I thought love required recognition," William confided to his father one evening. "I thought that if Alexander couldn't remember who I was, our relationship would disappear. But I was wrong. Love exists in the care we give, not in the gratitude we receive." King Edmund nodded, remembering his own struggles with similar realizations. "Your great-grandmother used to say that we don't love people for what they give us, but for who they are in our hearts. Alexander has taught us all about unconditional love, the kind that doesn't depend on memory or reciprocity." The family began hosting monthly gatherings for other families dealing with childhood neurological conditions. These sessions, held in the castle's more informal rooms, provided support and practical advice while also allowing Alexander to interact with other children who understood his world in ways that typical children couldn't. During one such gathering, Alexander became fascinated with a little girl named Sophie who had autism and communicated primarily through music. While their conditions were different, they seemed to understand each other on a level that transcended verbal communication. They would sit together, humming or clapping simple rhythms, finding joy in shared musical patterns. "Look at that," Gabriel observed, watching the interaction with scientific curiosity mixed with genuine warmth. "They're communicating in their own language." Catherine found these gatherings both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Seeing other families navigate similar challenges provided comfort and practical strategies, but it also reinforced the long-term reality of what they were facing. Most of the children at these gatherings would never improve significantly. Their families had learned to measure success in moments of connection rather than milestones of recovery. One mother, whose teenage daughter had been living with a progressive neurological condition for 5 years, offered Catherine advice that would stay with her for months to come: "Stop mourning the future you thought you'd have and start celebrating the present you actually have. Every day with our children is a gift. regardless of whether they remember it tomorrow. As Alexander's 9th birthday approached, the family faced the challenge of planning a celebration that would be meaningful for a child who wouldn't remember the party but could still experience joy in the moment. They decided on a small gathering with immediate family, focused on sensory experiences that Alexander seemed to enjoy: soft music, gentle lights, and simple activities that engaged his senses without overwhelming him. Isabella took charge of the decorations, choosing soft colors and familiar themes from Alexander's favorite storybooks. Gabriel researched party activities that would be appropriate for children with cognitive disabilities, eventually settling on a series of simple sensory stations with different textures, sounds, and gentle visual effects. "It's not about creating memories," Isabella explained to a friend who asked about the party plans. "It's about creating happiness right now, in this moment." The birthday celebration itself was unlike any royal birthday in the kingdom's history. There were no formal speeches or traditional ceremonies. Instead, Alexander spent the day surrounded by people who loved him, engaging with simple pleasures that brought him immediate joy. He laughed delightedly when Isabella sang happy birthday in silly voices. He clapped his hands when Gabriel played gentle music on different instruments. He allowed Catherine to help him blow out his birthday candles, though he seemed more interested in the colorful wax than in making wishes for the future. King Edmund watched his grandson enjoy his birthday party and felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. For months, he had struggled with anger at the unfairness of Alexander's condition, with grief for the future that had been stolen from his family. But, watching Alexander's pure enjoyment of simple pleasures, his genuine affection for the people around him, and his ability to find wonder in everyday moments, Edmund began to understand that perhaps they hadn't lost everything they thought they had. "He's teaching us how to live in the present," Edmund realized, sharing this insight with William later that evening. "Most of us spend so much time planning for the future or regretting the past that we miss the beauty of right now. Alexander lives entirely in the present moment, and there's something profoundly peaceful about that." As the sun set over Castle Valdoria on Alexander's 9th birthday, the royal family gathered in their private sitting room for their evening ritual of music and quiet togetherness. Alexander sat contentedly between his siblings, occasionally clapping along with the songs even though he couldn't remember learning them. The future remained uncertain and often frightening. Alexander's condition would continue to progress, presenting new challenges that they couldn't yet imagine. But, in that moment, surrounded by love and filled with the quiet joy of simply being together, the royal family had found a kind of peace that existed beyond memory, beyond expectation, and beyond the traditional definitions of a successful life. They had learned to measure their days not in achievements or milestones, but in moments of connection, instances of joy, and the steady presence of unconditional love that required nothing in return except the opportunity to be given freely. 3 years had passed since the initial diagnosis, and Castle Valdoria had transformed into something unprecedented in the kingdom's long history, a royal residence that openly celebrated difference and found profound meaning in unconventional forms of love. Alexander, now 12 years old physically but functioning at the level of a much younger child, had become the unexpected heart of a movement that would reshape how the kingdom understood disability, family, and the true nature of human worth. The changes were visible everywhere. The castle's corridors, once adorned only with formal portraits of stern-faced ancestors, now featured colorful artwork created by children with various disabilities who participated in the royal family's monthly gatherings. The gardens included sensory areas designed specifically for visitors with special needs, textured pathways for those who found comfort in different surfaces, wind chimes that created gentle music, and areas with aromatic herbs that provided calming scents. Princess Isabella, now 13, had grown into a confident young woman whose compassion was matched by her determination to create meaningful change. She had established what she called Alexander's Garden, a program that brought together children with disabilities and their siblings for regular activities at the castle. What had begun as support for their own family had evolved into a nationwide network of families who found strength in shared experiences. "I used to think being a princess meant wearing pretty dresses and attending fancy dinners," Isabella explained to a gathering of young carers, siblings, and children who helped care for family members with disabilities. "But I've learned that real royalty means using whatever advantages you have to help people who need support." Gabriel, now 15 and intellectually gifted beyond his years, had indeed pursued his interest in medical research. He spent summers working with neurologists at the kingdom's university, learning about current research into childhood neurological conditions. But his most meaningful work happened in the quiet moments with his brother, helping Alexander navigate daily activities, reading to him from picture books, and developing new ways to engage his remaining cognitive abilities. "The doctors are working on tomorrow's cures," Gabriel often said, "but I'm focused on today's care." Crown Prince William had found his role as heir transformed by his experience as Alexander's father. His public speeches now regularly addressed issues of inclusion and support for families dealing with disability. He had championed legislation providing better resources for special needs education and had established a royal foundation focused on childhood neurological research. More personally, William had discovered that his relationship with Alexander, while different from what he had once imagined, remained profoundly meaningful. Alexander no longer recognized him as Papa, but he clearly found comfort in William's presence. They had developed new rituals, gentle walks in the garden, simple games that engaged Alexander's senses, and quiet moments of just being together without the pressure of conversation or recognition. "Love doesn't require understanding," William had written in a letter that was later published in a collection supporting families with special needs children. "It only requires presence, patience, and the willingness to find joy in whatever form connection takes." Princess Catherine had perhaps changed the most visibly of all the family members. The devastating grief that had once threatened to overwhelm her had gradually transformed into a fierce advocacy for children who, like Alexander, existed outside society's traditional expectations. She had become an internationally recognized speaker on childhood disability issues, sharing her family's story with a candor that both surprised and inspired audiences around the world. "I spent so much time mourning the son I thought I was losing," Catherine said during a particularly moving speech at an international conference on childhood neurological conditions, "that I almost missed celebrating the son I actually had." Alexander taught our family that worth isn't measured in achievement or memory or future potential. Worth exists in the simple fact of being loved and of bringing light to other people's lives. Alexander himself had stabilized at a cognitive level roughly equivalent to that of a 3 or 4-year-old child. His world consisted of immediate sensory experiences, simple pleasures, and the comfort of familiar routines. He could no longer speak in complete sentences, but he communicated through gestures, expressions, and occasional single words that brought tremendous joy to his family. His days followed gentle patterns designed around his comfort and happiness. Mornings often began with music therapy sessions led by a specialist who had become part of the extended castle staff. Alexander would listen to familiar melodies, sometimes humming along or clapping his hands in rhythm. These sessions seemed to bring him a peace that carried through much of his day. Afternoons might include time in the sensory garden, where Alexander could explore different textures and enjoy the warmth of sunlight on his face. He particularly loved a section with soft grass where he could lie comfortably while listening to the sounds of wind chimes and gentle water features. Evenings remained family time, though the dynamics had evolved considerably. Isabella might read aloud from picture books, choosing stories with rhythmic language that seemed to soothe Alexander. Gabriel often played simple music or engaged Alexander in activities that stimulated his remaining cognitive abilities without overwhelming him. Catherine and William simply enjoyed being present with their son, finding meaning in small moments of connection that occurred without the need for complex communication. King Edmund, now 71, had watched his grandson's journey with a mixture of profound sadness and unexpected wisdom. He had lived long enough to understand that life's most important lessons often came disguised as life's greatest challenges. "Alexander has taught our entire kingdom about the difference between existing and living," the king reflected during a private interview with the kingdom's chief historian, who was documenting this unique period in royal history. "He will never sit on the throne, never make royal decrees, never fulfill any of the traditional roles we expected of him. Yet his influence on our family and our people has been deeper and more meaningful than many kings achieve in their entire reigns." The kingdom itself had been transformed by Alexander's story and the royal family's openness about their journey. Schools throughout Valdoria had implemented new programs supporting children with special needs. Medical facilities had received increased funding for pediatric neurological research. Most significantly, public attitudes toward disability had shifted dramatically. Children with various conditions who might once have been hidden away or institutionalized were now visible participants in community life. The royal family's example had given countless other families permission to love their different children openly and to seek support without shame. One particularly touching development was the emergence of what people began calling Alexander's Army, an informal network of children and teenagers throughout the kingdom who had been inspired by the royal family's example to become advocates and friends for peers with disabilities. Schools reported decreased bullying of special needs students and increased inclusion in social activities. "It's amazing what happens when you show children that different doesn't mean less valuable," observed Dr. Helena Marsh, who had remained actively involved in Alexander's care and had become a leading researcher in pediatric neurology partly because of her connection to the royal family. As Alexander approached his 13th birthday, the family faced new challenges. His condition had continued its slow but steady progression. He now required assistance with most basic activities and needed constant supervision for his safety. But these challenges came with unexpected gifts as well. Alexander's responses had become more emotionally pure, if less cognitively complex. His smiles were radiant when something pleased him. His distress, when it occurred, was immediate and honest, quickly soothed by familiar comforting techniques. He existed in a state of emotional transparency that his family found both heartbreaking and beautiful. "There's something profoundly peaceful about Alexander's way of experiencing the world," Catherine observed to Dr. Marsh during one of their regular consultations. "He doesn't worry about the future or regret the past. He doesn't judge himself or others. He simply experiences each moment as it comes, finding joy in simple pleasures and accepting comfort when he needs it." The family had made the difficult but practical decision to convert Alexander's bedroom into a more specialized care environment. Medical equipment had been discreetly integrated into room design that remained warm and personal. A hospital bed replaced his childhood furniture, but it was surrounded by familiar pictures, soft textures, and gentle lighting that maintained the atmosphere of a loved child's room rather than a medical facility. Professional caregivers now assisted with Alexander's daily needs, but the family remained deeply involved in his care. Isabella had learned to help with his feeding routine and took pride in being able to calm him during difficult moments. Gabriel had mastered the operation of various pieces of medical equipment and often assisted the nurses with routine care procedures. William and Catherine had developed an unspoken system for sharing the emotional burden of Alexander's care. When one of them felt overwhelmed by grief or frustration, the other would quietly take over, allowing their partner time to process difficult emotions away from Alexander's presence. "We learned that taking care of ourselves isn't selfish when we're caring for someone who depends on us completely," Catherine explained to a support group for parents of special needs children. "Alexander benefits when we're emotionally healthy, so maintaining our own well-being became part of loving him properly." The 13th birthday celebration reflected how much the family's understanding of meaningful events had evolved. Instead of a traditional party, they organized a quiet gathering focused entirely on sensory experiences that brought Alexander pleasure. The main celebration room was filled with soft music, gentle lighting, and familiar scents. Different stations offered various textures for Alexander to explore: smooth stones warmed by heating pads, soft fabrics in different weights, and containers of rice or sand that he could run through his fingers. Family members and close friends participated by simply being present with Alexander, following his lead for interaction rather than imposing any expectations on him. When he seemed interested in a particular activity, they joined him. When he appeared tired or overwhelmed, they gave him space. The most moving moment came when Isabella began singing a lullaby that Catherine had sung to Alexander as a baby. Though Alexander rarely responded to music anymore, something about this particular melody seemed to reach him. He became very still, focusing intently on his sister's voice, and, for just a moment, his expression held a flicker of something that might have been recognition. "Even if he doesn't remember us," Isabella said later, "I think some part of him knows that we're his people, that we love him." As evening approached and Alexander grew tired, the family gathered around his bed for their nightly ritual. Gabriel played soft guitar music while Catherine gently massaged Alexander's hands, a technique that seemed to help him relax. William sat close by, occasionally humming along with the music. Isabella curled up in a chair nearby, sometimes joining in the quiet songs but often just enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. In these moments, the devastating losses of Alexander's condition faded into the background, replaced by a different kind of fullness. The family had learned to find meaning not in what Alexander could remember or achieve, but in the love they could offer him and the tenderness he could still accept. King Edmund, watching from the doorway, felt a profound sense of completion. His grandson would never wear a crown or rule a kingdom in any traditional sense. But Alexander had already accomplished something perhaps more valuable. He had taught an entire family, and through them an entire kingdom, about the truest forms of love, service, and human dignity. As the gentle music filled Alexander's room and his family settled into their evening routines, there was a sense of peace that transcended the ongoing challenges they faced. Tomorrow would bring its own difficulties, its own small joys, its own opportunities to choose love over despair. But tonight, in this quiet castle room filled with family love and gentle care, Alexander was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by people who had learned to measure success not in memory or achievement, but in the simple, profound act of loving someone exactly as they are. The kingdom of Valdoria had produced many notable rulers throughout its history, but perhaps none had taught more important lessons about the nature of true nobility than the young prince who would never remember his own name but who had shown his family and his people what unconditional love looked like in its purest form. In the end, Alexander's legacy wasn't in the kingdom he would never rule, but in the hearts he had changed and the love he had inspired simply by being himself, perfectly, completely, and beautifully himself.